We're going to do our video lecture on the presidency and some on the bureaucracy of the executive branch. So we'll start with the president and then kind of talk about, what else makes up the executive branch and what the president oversees. So when we go back to the founding, Article 2 of the Constitution establishes the presidency. It says executive powers shall be vested in a president of the United States of America. The founders, they discussed a few different types of options when it came to the executive branch. So one idea was, whether our country should be run by a council of individuals, having a multi-head executive instead of vesting this power in one person. Um, but they end up going with the presidency, and they model the presidency after the British governors that oversaw the colonies during, prior to becoming the United States. And then, of course, there was the disagreement over how we should elect this person. Um, Today we have the Electoral College, and we've talked about it a little bit, and it is one of the more confusing aspects of American government. But the Electoral College, essentially, the founding fathers weren't quite comfortable having a popular election for the presidency because of the amount of power they were giving this person. They thought there should be something between the people and the presidency. Some people, some of the founders actually suggested that Congress elect the president, but the other side opposes this, and this is our Federalists and our Anti-Federalists arguing over this. And so they come up with the mechanism of the Electoral College. And so the Electoral College is the system where we, the people, cast our ballots, and each state gets a number of Electoral College votes based on the number of senators we have plus the number of House representatives we have, which is informed by population. And so when we vote in our state, we're essentially telling our electors how to cast our electoral college votes. And so the idea was that this would make this would put kind of a system in place where if the people happened to elect someone who was not qualified or was tyrannical or something like that, the Electoral College could always vote the opposite way. But we've yet to see a situation where the Electoral College has actually done that. If you remember in 2016, there were a lot of people in different states saying that, the Electoral College should not elect Donald Trump. He wasn't qualified for the presidency. But none of the electors ended up voting against the popular vote of their states. Some states have actually passed laws now where they are not allowed to do that, which kind of goes against the intention of the Electoral College. Um, One of the complaints about the Electoral College is that it makes the president more accountable to Congress than the people. The people, don't get to hold the president directly accountable for what he does. So, we had this talk in class about how, whether we should get rid of the Electoral College or whether it's time to reform the Electoral College. The Electoral College definitely gives more influence in the presidential election to small states because combined together, those states in the middle of the country, they don't have a lot of Electoral College votes individually, but as a voting bloc, they do, and they tend to be very red and conservative. And so that gives them a lot of influence on the presidency. The flip side is that the popular vote favors the areas where people actually live, big cities, and big cities, tend to be more blue, they tend to be more liberal. And so, of course, there are some who want reform because they believe that the popular vote of the presidency would more accurately reflect the will of actual people. But the smaller states make the argument that if the Electoral College went away, that they essentially wouldn't matter anymore. Presidential candidates would not have to campaign in small states. So our legislators at the state level choose our electors who by popular vote, and these are the individuals who will cast our electoral college votes in the presidential election. Um, by 1830, we start to get the convention system that we have today, where the parties hold conventions to nominate their candidates. And this is where people argue that the public has the most input in the process of nominating who they want to represent their party. Um, what has happened throughout the history of our country is we have tended towards giving the president more power. Like we talked about this a few times in class, where at times when the country is in crisis, and it's interesting because now we're dealing with a crisis as well, we tend to want the president's leadership more than we do when there's not a big crisis. So during times of crisis, the president has usually assumed more power, such as the Civil War, the Great Depression, 9/11, and now with COVID-19 and the coronavirus. And usually, when the president assumes this power, they don't typically relinquish that power when the crisis is over. So the presidency has gotten more and more influential as the history of our country has gone forward. So, Article 2, Section 1 of the U.S. Constitution deals with how we elect the president. And then Sections 2 and 3 outline the powers of the president. And these are similar to what we talked about in our federalism chapter, where there are the express powers of federal government, and this applies to the president as well. Express powers are the ones that are stated in the Constitution. These powers cannot be taken away or debated. They are given to the president. And this would include things like making treaties with other countries, granting pardons to individuals, nominating judges and other officials to fill vacancies in the executive branch and the judicial branch. These powers are given to the president by the Constitution, and so we would have to amend the Constitution to make a change in those powers, but without that, they cannot be taken away. The implied powers are where things get a little tricky, because presidents have used this kind of idea of implied power to assume more power when they need it. And so, if you remember when we talked about the necessary and proper clause, it's not it's not spelled out what that means, but it essentially says that if powers are needed for the president or Congress or someone to carry out their duties, they can assume those powers as long as it does not violate other parts of the Constitution. So, an example to kind of illustrate this: the Constitution gives the president the power to, say, appoint judges, federal judges, Supreme Court judges, but it does not give him the power to remove those people from office. And so, depending on the office that he is appointed, it's kind of assumed that he has this power. The exception being the Supreme Court. The president cannot dismiss a Supreme Court justice. They have to retire or possibly be impeached. But with other positions in the executive branch, it is assumed that because the executive branch is under the president's control, that he can remove anybody that he appoints to a position. Delegated powers are when Congress passes laws and the president has to use the powers given to him by Congress to execute those laws. And then the Constitution says the president shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed. So this is something that President Trump has definitely upset people about. The idea that the president is not above the law, that the president is required to execute the law as it is written. President Trump has definitely kind of played in the gray area there, where as far as, not divesting from his businesses or using the office of the presidency for his own personal gain and things like that. And it's not to say that he's the only one that has ever done this, but he has done it very brazenly and openly. And so there's definitely a question here about whether the president has lived up to this part of the Constitution. All right. Express powers. So, other powers that are expressly stated in the Constitution. Military power. The president is the commander in chief of the military, head of all armed services and intelligence agencies. The president can deploy them, but the president cannot declare war. Only Congress can declare war. But if the president, say, needs to deploy someone, say there's like a good example of this is when President Obama sent SEAL Team 6 into Pakistan to get Osama bin Laden. In a situation like that, there's not enough time to go to Congress and get authorization. So the president can order a quick military action like that based on relevant intelligence that the president has. And because those military individuals will not be stationed there long term, they're going in, they're coming out to complete a very specific mission, the president does have the power to order those. But if it's a long term war, the president must go to Congress and get Congress to declare war. We talked about the judicial powers, can grant pardons, reprieves, and amnesty. And then diplomatic power. The president is considered our head of state, which means that he is our representative to other countries. He negotiates on our behalf, signs treaties. He can send someone in his place. Sometimes the president will send the vice president or the secretary of state, but that has to be authorized by the president. Now, treaties still have to be approved by Congress, similar to his appointment powers. Any treaty that the president enters into will go to Congress and they will vote on it and they can approve or reject it. But the president can make what are called executive agreements, and these are kind of like the executive orders that the president uses, where these are only enforceable during that president's time in office. And once that president, steps down or loses an election or finishes 2 terms, the next president can cancel those executive agreements. And then executive power to make appointments with oversight by the Senate. We talked about that. Executive privilege. This is another one that President Trump has been criticized for as far as, not necessarily using it in the way it was intended. Executive privilege is this idea that communications between the president and the president's advisors should not be revealed to the public without the president's consent, or not revealed, that it could even be kept from other parts of government. This typically in the past has referred to things like ordering a strike, say to get Osama bin Laden, or troop movements, or just cabinet meetings and things like that. But this has definitely been stretched by President Trump, and he applies it to literally any conversation he has that he doesn't want people to know about, conversations with foreign leaders, things like that. And it's understandable if the president is operating in the interest of the country, but if the president is operating in his own interest to enrich himself or deceive other parts of government or the American people, then there's a question as to whether executive privilege applies to those communications. This is what Richard Nixon got in trouble for in the 1970s. Richard Nixon actually believed that the president was above the law and could not be held accountable, and he found out very quick that that was not the case. But President Trump has definitely gotten away with a lot that probably, if he was the president 40, 50 years ago, would have gotten him removed from office. Legislative power, really the president does not have any power to tell Congress what to do. Really, the extent of the president's legislative power is doing the State of the Union every year, keeping Congress and the public informed of his agenda. And definitely the president has to communicate and cooperate with Congress to get their agenda, accomplished. But the president does not have the power to tell Congress what to do. Now, we talked about the executive orders. Executive orders essentially are rules or regulations issued by the president that have the weight of law, but they are not necessarily permanent. So if we look at, say, President Trump issued an executive order just the other day, banning immigration for, I think it's going to be 2 months while we're dealing with COVID-19, essentially saying that other people cannot come into the country because they may bring it with them into the country. And then if you remember, in his early days in office, he issued the executive order with the travel ban, which prevented people from coming to the United States from certain countries. These types of things, the president can do them through executive order. But if they are unconstitutional, they can be challenged by Congress or the American people. His travel ban was challenged in the Supreme Court. His executive order to end the DACA program was challenged in the Supreme Court. And so executive orders, though, have to be constitutional, and they are only enforceable while that president is in office and can be overturned by the next president. If you look at this chart is actually from, let's see, I think it's 2017. So this is executive orders through October 13th of 2017. And if you look at this, you can see the amount of executive orders used by each president. Eisenhower still holds the record for using it the most, 60 executive orders. Johnson at 58. But if you look up at the top, one of the things that's interesting about this is President Trump criticized President Obama heavily during his administration for using the executive order. He tweeted about it quite a bit and said that it was unconstitutional and President Obama was, trying to be a dictator and yada, 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 all this. President Obama used the least executive orders of any of our modern day presidents at 26. And Trump surpassed, that's 26 in 8 years. Trump surpassed him in 2 years of his first term in office. So it's a bit funny that Trump criticized Obama for that and then came into office and has already, significantly surpassed the amount of executive orders issued by President Obama. Inherent powers, these are ones that the president can claim. Things such as war powers, censorship powers, habeas corpus, things like that. But again, excuse me, many of those powers are subject to Congress and other parts of government. Like we said, Congress has the power to declare war. Presidents have tried to assume more and more power in this area, but Congress still must declare war if it is going to be anything over, I believe, 60 days. The president can order an action for up to 60 days. When we hit that cutoff, Congress then has to approve, to vote to go to war. So if we look at the War Powers Resolution from 1973, resolution that stated that the president can only deploy troops if Congress agrees or if American troops are already under attack. So one of the ways that this has been interpreted, interestingly, in the modern era is President George W. Bush. When we were attacked on 9/11, President Bush took pretty quick action to get troops into Afghanistan. So by the time Congress declares war on Afghanistan and the Taliban, troops were already there because George W. Bush wanted to respond to the attack on 9/11 very quickly. That was one where the intent of the president and the intent of Congress lined up pretty well. But if you look at like the Vietnam War and Operation Desert Storm and some of the other wars that we've been involved in, Congress and the president haven't always seen eye to eye and kind of fight over this power. But 9/11 was one of those, moments where everybody was kind of on the same page in 2001. All right. So the president's cabinet. The cabinet is basically all of the heads of the different executive branch agencies. And they are secretaries that head each of these departments, but they also serve as the cabinet or a group of advisors to the president. And the idea is that they should be experts in these areas. There are now actually 15 executive branch agencies in a defined and updated graphic. The one that is not listed here is the Department of Homeland Security. And of course, that was created after 9/11 so that all the intelligence agencies were under one umbrella. But each of these departments is headed by a secretary that is appointed by the president and approved by Congress. And then they act as a group of advisors to the president, especially in the areas that their department deals with. And then on top of the cabinet, we also have the National Security Council, which advises the president on matters of, war, security, terrorism, all of those intelligence, all of those types of things. So the National Security Council is made up of the vice president, secretary of state, secretary of defense, and anyone else that the president invites, typically the heads of the different military branches, the heads of the different intelligence agencies, things like that. And then on top of that, there's a whole White House staff that keeps, the president, that keeps everything ready and prepared for the president. Things like analysts, advisors, policy experts, all of those people make up the president's White House staff. If you've ever watched The West Wing, you kind of see how this works, like the inner workings of the White House. The kitchen cabinet. This was actually established by, I believe it was Roosevelt. The kitchen cabinet is an informal group of advisors. So every president comes into office with people that they already trust, people that they've known throughout their life. And so many presidents will use those people as advisors as well, whether it's their faith leader, whether it's, maybe their most respected professor that they grew up with. Maybe some of y'all will put me in your kitchen cabinet when you become president. Or just anyone that they really trust could serve in this role. And it's very informal. No one is appointed. It's just people that the president respects and trusts their opinion. And then we have some executive offices that help the president and the executive branch carry out their duties. The Office of Management and Budget, they essentially estimate how much things are going to cost. Council of Economic Advisors, exactly what it sounds like. And then, of course, the National Security Council. And then a couple of other things that the president has at their disposal that other government officials really don't is their ability to go to the public, to kind of enlist the public to support what it is they want to do. The president is probably the most visible person in government in our country. And so anytime, if you've been paying attention recently, President Trump has been doing press briefings almost every day since the COVID-19 crisis has started. And that's one thing that the president has at their disposal, is that anytime they want to be on TV or in the media, they can do that. If they have something to say, everyone is going to stop and listen to what they have to say. And really, Franklin Roosevelt was the first one to really use this to his advantage. Even when he was running for president, he did these radio addresses called the Fireside Chat. And essentially it was him connecting with the American people during the Great Depression, telling them about the New Deal and what his plans would be if he was elected president, and just using it as a way to reach out and connect with people. And some Presidents have been really good at this, and some not so much. If you look at, I've talked a little bit about John F. Kennedy, and John F. Kennedy gave great speeches and would go on TV to address the country, during the crises that happened during his short time in office. Ronald Reagan was fantastic at this. He was a really great speaker. He was a former actor, so he looked great on TV. George W. Bush, a lot of people said he wasn't the smartest individual, but when he gave his speech, he really had this charisma and kind of, you felt like he was really speaking kind of, openly and trying to connect with people. President Obama was the first one to kind of use the internet to really do this with the American people. First president to use social media and use them to, sometimes he would just post funny stuff, or sometimes he would just reach out to the country after a shooting or something, to try and connect with people. And then, of course, we have President Trump, who has used the internet more like a weapon. But the president, when the president has something to say in public, people tend to stop and at least listen to what he's saying. And then signing statements. This is one that President Trump loves. Is anytime he's signing a bill, he likes to make a big deal out of it. It's always on TV and stuff like that. And when a president accomplishes something, like gets a big piece of legislation through Congress that has to do with their agenda, the signing statement is kind of the celebration that this thing has been accomplished. And so the president, if they're good at what they do, they know how to use the media to connect with people. All right, and then the bureaucracy. We've touched on the bureaucracy a little bit, but the bureaucracy is just all those agencies that carry out the work of government. And so the bureaucracy, it's all the agencies, offices, rules, people that carry out this work. And most of your people who work in the bureaucracy, they're not elected. They are hired employees who are hired to do a specific job for a specific agency. They implement the laws that are passed by Congress, and the executive branch oversees the bureaucracy and enforces rules and regulations. Most of the executive branch positions that are employee-based, not election-based, most of them still use a type of merit system where you are hired for this job based on criteria like your level of education, your experience, recommendations. Some positions you have to take an exam, like if you want to work in the Foreign Service at the State Department or the CIA or the FBI. These high-skilled types of positions have a lot of qualifications that you have to meet. And the merit system was an answer to the spoil system or the patronage system, where kind of prior to Andrew Jackson, people were getting their government positions simply because they knew somebody or they had made a big donation or they supported a certain candidate. And he made some changes. Him and a few others have put this merit system in place so that we were hiring people who were qualified for the job they were expected to do. The elected positions, or the appointed positions rather, sometimes will still be selected based on patronage and the spoil system. But for people who are hired to work in the government, there's a high bar for a lot of these positions that you have to meet. The one downside of the bureaucracy is they essentially are hired employees who are just following the law and the rules that they are given. But elected officials love to blame the bureaucracy every time something goes wrong. So you hear that a lot from Congress, from the president. It's government bureaucracy, it's red tape, et cetera, et cetera. But these individuals are just following the rules that were created by the elected and the appointed officials. So they get a bad rap sometimes. And one of the things that you hear people talk about when they talk about the dissatisfaction with government is that government is too big. It's become too big. Well, if we look at the growth trend of government, In 1968, there were 3 million civilian employees and 3.6 million military personnel. As of 2014, that has decreased to 2.7 million civilian employees and 1.5 million military personnel. So government has actually gotten smaller as time has gone on. So there's this argument that a lot of politicians like to use that government has gotten too big and too wasteful, and it probably is in some areas. The problem is that overall government has actually gotten smaller. Most of the growth in the bureaucracy has been at the state level. There are about 19.3 million people working in state government as of about 2015. Now, a few organizations within the executive branch of the federal government. There's the different departments that we talked about, the 15 cabinet departments. There's also independent agencies. This is like NASA, National Aeronautical and Space Association, I think. It might be administration. NASA, they have a very specific goal, which is space exploration, science, the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. These are not part of the cabinet, but they are under the umbrella of the executive branch. They're overseen by the executive branch. But independent agencies have a very narrowly tailored purpose. The EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, is a very specific purpose. NASA, space exploration. So these agencies are a bit more specific than our big departments. Government corporations are businesses that are set up to provide a service that are run by the government. And the best example is Amtrak. Amtrak is the train system that travels around our country to take passengers where they need to go. It's not a very lucrative business, so there's not a private corporation providing this service. But because it is necessary, more necessary in the Northeast, the government runs this corporation for this purpose. And then there's a bunch of independent regulatory commissions. I'll let you read over those that regulate different areas like trade, communications, commerce, all that kind of stuff as well. Now, the idea behind all of these departments is that they're supposed to promote public welfare or do what is in the best interest of the citizens. And so there's agencies like Health and Human Services, Housing and Urban Development. They provide most of our welfare services. Veterans Affairs, which take care of our veterans once they have completed their service in the military. Most of these agencies are providing a service to the American public, but even the ones that aren't providing a direct service, like say the Department of the Interior, or the Department of Energy, they're still supposed to operate in a way that is in the best interest of the American citizen. The problem is, and we talked about this when we talked about interest groups, is that sometimes those agencies, the bureaucratic agencies, can get kind of wrapped up with interest groups and lobbyists, and especially being influenced by Congress people who are tied up with interest groups and lobbyists, can operate in a way that is in the best interest of, say, a interest group or a corporation than in the best interest of the American public. And that's what we call agency capture. But the iron triangle kind of illustrates this process, and this graphic was in your interest group section as well. And so what is the purpose of the bureaucracy? Or what are their goals? Mostly to maintain the stability of our country, whether it is economic, whether it is social welfare, whatever it is. And so some of the economic groups, in addition to the ones we've already talked about, the Federal Reserve tries to maintain the value of our currency, our credit system, uses monetary policy to fight inflation and deflation. When the COVID-19 situation started, there was a big scare because the stock market, crashed pretty significantly. Um, so the Federal Reserve tries to mitigate and regulate that kind of stuff. We have different revenue agencies that exist to collect revenue for the federal government, like the IRS, which most people hate. Custom service, anytime you come back into the U.S., you have to claim all that stuff. Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms and explosives, they regulate those items, make sure people are registering, paying taxes, all that kind of stuff. Now, some of the reforms we've talked about throughout the semester are things that right now they have a little more conservative kind of slant to them because of the administration. Devolution, we talked about the idea that the federal government giving more control back to the states and local government. That's typically been part of the Republican platform, where the Republicans tend to believe in states' rights over the federal government. But we've seen with President Trump and kind of your Mitch McConnells and people like that, Lindsey Graham, that they don't really adhere to this as much anymore. If the states disagree with them, then they're fully okay with overruling the states and trying to take power away from them. So what we've seen more is that they believe in states' rights as long as the states agree with them, which is not necessarily what your traditional Republicans tend to believe in. Privatization, taking responsibility away from government and using a private business to do that work. Things like, you see this a lot at the state level, where instead of having a government entity do work, they outsource it to a private business, like prisons or collecting parking tickets or red light cameras, things like that. And the argument is that a private business can do it better, faster, and cheaper than the federal government. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it does not, because the problem is we talked about, businesses exist to turn a profit. And so they're going to look for as many ways as possible to make a profit from the service they're providing, sometimes at the detriment of citizens. And so this doesn't always work out for the best. So it is definitely one of those ideological things where liberals and conservatives are very split on this. And then, of course, oversight. The idea that the bureaucracy is supposed to have oversight over different areas of government, can investigate and hold hearings if things are not being done the way they are supposed to, and essentially holding people accountable for corruption and not adhering to the Constitution.